The space station hung like a pale star against the black void. Its lights glimmered softly, reflecting off the metal surface like tiny beacons for travelers in the emptiness of space. Inside, the corridors hummed with quiet activity. Humans moved with purpose, checking consoles and reviewing charts, while aliens of different shapes and colors floated or walked through the station with calm precision. Among them, one figure stood apart, silent, still, and almost ghost-like. Valith, the alien woman, glided through the station with movements that seemed both deliberate and effortless. Her silver eyes reflected the dim light of the corridor, catching attention without any effort on her part. Humans often stared at her, but she rarely noticed them. She had been here for months, part of a research delegation, yet she had said nothing, not a word, not even a sound that resembled speech. Her kind communicated in ways humans could not understand, through thoughts and feelings that could travel directly from mind to mind. She did not need words, but the humans had words, words that stumbled over each other, sometimes clumsy, sometimes beautiful. They spoke of themselves, of their homes, of distant worlds, of laughter and sadness, of ideas and dreams. Valith watched all of it quietly, her silver eyes like mirrors that reflected the human world but revealed none of her own thoughts. She learned more about humans simply by watching than many did by listening. Eli, a human linguist, was the first to notice something different about her. He had been assigned to study alien communication, a task that most found tedious. But Eli had a curiosity that went beyond textbooks and data logs. He studied Valith not as a specimen, not as a subject to be analyzed, but as a being to be understood. Her silence was not empty. There was depth there, a history, a story, and he wanted to know it. He watched her from across the observation deck, where the stars spilled light like diamonds over the dark. Valith stood near the railing, staring outward. Her eyes caught the glow of distant suns, reflecting galaxies in a way that made him catch his breath. He whispered to himself, not realizing Valith could hear every word. "Her eyes, it's like she's holding centuries in them," he said, voice low and uncertain, more to the stars than anyone else. Valith froze, time itself seemed to slow. In that moment, everything else faded into insignificance. The stars, the station, the hum of machinery, even the movements of humans and aliens around her, all of it blurred and dimmed. There was only the voice, the meaning, the recognition that someone had noticed. Not just noticed her presence, but her essence, her thoughts, her experience, her being. A human had seen more in her eyes than most of her own kind had in lifetimes. Her heart, though humans would call it that, beat with a strange intensity. She could feel curiosity stirring, a sensation she did not often allow herself. For centuries, her kind had trained to remain detached, to observe without interference, to avoid entanglement with species that experienced emotion in such chaotic ways. Yet here was a human, and he had seen. He had touched something inside her that she had thought untouchable. Valith turned, almost unconsciously, and her gaze met Eli's. For a heartbeat, they held each other's attention. He looked surprised, startled, but not afraid. His curiosity was genuine, not prying or fearful. It was respect, it was wonder, it was recognition. That small human gesture, a glance that acknowledged her without needing to understand everything, made her feel a connection she had never allowed herself. The observation deck was crowded with people. Scientists and engineers moved about, glancing at displays and screens, discussing readings and schedules. Aliens floated past, their forms shimmering with light and subtle colors. Yet Valith felt the world narrow to a pinpoint, and that pinpoint was Eli. His voice had pierced her silence, and his eyes had pierced the wall she had built around herself. For hours she lingered near the railing, pretending to observe the stars while her mind raced. She replayed the words, the tone, the subtle inflection. She had heard humans speak in her life, yes, but never like this. Not about her, not about her eyes. Her own species had no concept of verbal admiration. The closest they came was a silent acknowledgement in thought, a mere nod of understanding. But this, the humans' words, were different. They carried warmth, curiosity, even a kind of awe. Eli, meanwhile, could not tear his gaze away. He had studied many alien species, yet none had held his attention like Valith. Her silence was not empty. It was a riddle wrapped in beauty and intelligence. He had not intended for her to hear him, and yet somehow it mattered that she did. The fact that she had noticed him noticing her stirred something inside him he could not name. A bond, perhaps, forming in the quietest way possible. Over the next few days, Valith began to observe Eli more closely. She followed him through corridors, watched him at his workstations, and noticed how he interacted with others. Humans were curious, often careless, yet resilient in ways her people rarely were. They adapted, they laughed in danger, they persisted in the face of obstacles that would cause other species to retreat. Eli embodied all of this. He was human in every sense, and yet there was something more, something that resonated with her. She noticed how he paused when he thought no one was watching, how he sometimes spoke to machines as if they understood him, how he smiled at small things. A floating light, a passing alien, a star visible through a viewport. There was a rhythm to his life, a vitality that was chaotic but precise, fragile but enduring. Valeth began to anticipate his movements, understanding the patterns in his work and the subtleties in his expressions. One evening, during a routine systems check, she found herself standing beside him at the control panel. She had not intended to approach. She simply moved, almost magnetically, drawn by an invisible thread. Eli noticed her, of course, and froze for a brief moment. Then he smiled, not out of surprise, but out of acknowledgement. "You're here," he said softly, though it was more a statement than a question. "I wondered if you'd come." The station around them faded again, though less intensely than before. She was no longer entirely lost in the moment. She was cautious, aware, but willing to linger. Eli turned his attention back to the panel, but he felt her presence, a weight that was gentle yet undeniable. He did not speak further. He did not need to. Words were unnecessary for now. They worked side by side, human and alien, a partnership unspoken but growing. Valeth's curiosity began to take shape. She tested small gestures, subtle movements that could signal recognition without breaking the strict rules of her kind. A tilt of the head, a slight shift in posture, a momentary glance held longer than necessary. Each one was a thread, weaving a connection between her and Eli. Rumors among humans and aliens alike began to stir. Some whispered about the silent alien and the human who dared notice her. Others speculated that something was happening that none could define. Valeth paid little attention. She was learning something far more important, understanding another being, seeing another being, and being seen in return. In the quiet moments of the observation deck, when the stars spilled their light across the station, Valeth found herself thinking of the words Eli had spoken. They were simple, fleeting, yet profound. They had pierced centuries of training, barriers of culture, and her own carefully maintained silence. A single human phrase had frozen time for her, and now, slowly, she began to move forward within it. She did not speak, not yet, but she considered it, pondered it, weighed the strange warmth of curiosity and recognition. Words were dangerous for her species. They exposed more than she intended. Yet the desire to communicate, to bridge the gap between human and alien, began to simmer beneath her composure. That night, as the station rotated silently in the void, Valeth lingered by the viewport, staring at a distant star. She remembered the human's words, the surprise in his eyes, the way his presence had lingered in her mind. Time for her had stopped in that instant, and in that stillness, she realized something she had never admitted to herself. For the first time, she was willing to risk the rules of her people for the chance to connect, and perhaps, just perhaps, to be understood. Valeth moved through the corridors of the space station with quiet purpose, her silver eyes reflecting the soft glow of the artificial lights above. She had watched Eli for days now, each movement of his body, each expression on his face, etched into her mind. It was strange, this fascination, this urge to follow without reason, yet it felt natural, necessary, as if some unseen force guided her steps. She had always observed, always remained apart, but something about this human drew her in. Eli, unaware of the depths of her attention, went about his work with careful precision. He checked consoles, adjusted sensors, and took notes on alien communications. His curiosity was insatiable, a constant hum of energy that seemed to ripple through the station. He noticed Valeth more often now, not merely as a subject for study, but as a presence he could not ignore. When she appeared near a doorway or hovered at a viewport, he felt a strange awareness, a sensation that someone was silently speaking to him without words. Humans spoke too much, and yet, sometimes they said nothing at all. Eli had begun to understand that Valeth communicated in ways he could not yet interpret. A tilt of her head, a narrowing of her eyes, a subtle shift in posture, all were messages. He began leaving small items near her usual spots, a polished stone from a distant asteroid, a tiny sketch of the station, a note with a simple greeting. Each gesture was a quiet invitation, a thread thrown across the chasm of silence that separated them. Valeth noticed each one. The stone she picked up and held in her fingers, feeling its rough texture, wondering what human significance it might carry. The sketch she studied, seeing the lines and curves and understanding that the human had seen her world from his own perspective. The note she did not read aloud. Words were dangerous, unpredictable, but the intention behind them resonated in her mind, clear and precise. Eli had reached out, and she had noticed. Days passed in this unspoken dance. Valeth followed him through the lab, watched him interact with other humans and aliens, and learned more about his kind than any formal observation could have taught her. Humans were loud, clumsy, and chaotic, yet they carried an energy that made even the stillest moments seem alive. She noticed the care he took with small details, the way he smiled when he discovered something new, the way he reacted when frustrated, and the small, unguarded moments when he laughed quietly to himself. Her people, the elders of her kind who communicated silently and with precision, had warned her. Human attachment was dangerous. Emotions were unpredictable, messy, and often destructive. To form bonds with their species could compromise centuries of training, could weaken the mind, and could invite chaos into one's life. Yet Valeth found herself drawn to this human not despite the warnings, but perhaps because of them. Eli began to sense her presence more intentionally. He caught glimpses of silver eyes at the corner of his vision and felt her attention in ways he could not explain. One evening, during a routine systems check, he paused when he noticed her standing silently near the control panels. She did not move forward, did not speak, yet her gaze held him in place. "You're here," he said softly, the words more acknowledgement than question. His voice carried no fear, only a quiet curiosity, an invitation to connect. Valeth inclined her head in response, not with speech but with recognition. That small gesture conveyed far more than words could have. It was an affirmation that she was present, that she saw him as he had seen her. In the following days, Valeth allowed herself to linger in his proximity more openly. She observed the humans and aliens as they worked, but her attention always returned to Eli. She studied the way his hands moved over controls, how he adjusted screens, how he scribbled notes and sketches. She began to anticipate his movements, understanding patterns in his work and in his behavior. In her mind, she mapped him like she had mapped the stars outside the station. Eli, for his part, felt a growing sense of connection. He did not yet understand how much she noticed, how deeply she observed, but he sensed it. He began to speak aloud more often, testing the boundaries, offering words not as commands or instructions, but as conversation, as attempts to bridge the gap. He described his work, the views outside the station, stories of distant planets he had visited, memories from Earth. Valeth listened, absorbing everything with the intensity of someone learning not just language, but the essence of human experience. One evening, during a rare quiet period on the station, Eli and Valeth found themselves together on the observation deck, watching a comet streak across the void. The lights of distant suns reflected in her silver eyes, giving them an almost otherworldly glow. Eli spoke softly, describing the comet's trajectory, its speed, its composition. Valeth tilted her head slightly, noting each word, each pause, each inflection. She had learned to interpret not just meaning, but emotion, understanding the subtleties of human communication. "You notice everything," Eli said quietly, almost to himself, but perhaps for her ears as well. "Even things I don't notice." The recognition resonated in her mind, a strange warmth stirring where there had once been detachment. But the tranquility of these moments was fragile. The elders of her kind began to voice concern. Through subtle telepathic transmissions, warnings reached her mind, urging caution. Attachment to humans was risky. Curiosity could lead to vulnerability. Recognition could lead to chaos. Valeth understood the warnings, but she could not ignore the pull she felt toward Eli. The human had seen her in a way no one else had, and that recognition was intoxicating. Tension grew quietly on the station. Other humans whispered about the silent alien and the human who seemed to attract her attention. Aliens exchanged subtle signals of concern. Valeth felt the scrutiny but remained composed, observing the reactions with her usual precision. She had learned to manage her people's expectations while exploring this new curiosity, balancing between caution and the desire to understand this human who had sparked something within her. Eli, unaware of the full scope of her internal conflict, continued his quiet efforts. He left small tokens of attention, an interesting rock, a sketch, a note, and continued to speak openly about his experiences and observations. He treated her as a partner, not a project, and the trust he offered slowly eroded the barriers Valeth had maintained for centuries. She began to wonder if it was possible to connect across species, if a bridge could exist between human and alien, built not on necessity but on mutual recognition and respect. One night, a station-wide alert sounded, signaling a minor system malfunction. Humans rushed to consoles, aliens moved efficiently to assist, and Valeth moved with them, yet she remained slightly apart, observing. Eli approached a panel near where she stood and glanced at her. "I could use an extra set of eyes," he said softly, a half-joke, half-invitation. Valeth considered it. Normally, she would not interfere, would not participate in human work in such a direct way, yet something compelled her to step closer, to observe more closely, to engage in this human world. She moved silently to the panel, her presence calm but undeniable. Together, they adjusted settings, monitored systems, and ensured the station remained stable. In those moments, Valeth realized the power of shared experience. Words were not necessary. Presence, attention, and intention were enough. And yet the desire to speak, to articulate what she felt, began to stir. She felt the pull of human curiosity, the warmth of recognition, and the strange exhilaration of connection. She understood that the barriers she had maintained were not unbreakable. They were choices, and choices could be reconsidered. By the time the alert ended, the station quieted once more. Humans and aliens returned to their routines, the corridors humming softly with resumed activity. Valeth lingered for a moment, gazing at Eli, her silver eyes reflecting both light and thought. For the first time, she considered the possibility of speaking, not in defiance of her kind, but as a step toward understanding and connection. Eli turned toward her, sensing her attention. "You're learning," he said, voice gentle, patient, as if acknowledging the invisible effort she was making. Valeth inclined her head, the gesture carrying far more than words could express. She was learning. She was observing. She was beginning to understand not just human communication, but human emotion, intent, and connection. And for the first time in her long existence, she felt a faint spark of something new, curiosity not as observer, but as participant. The stars outside shimmered, distant and eternal. Inside the station, two beings, human and alien, stood quietly, observing each other, learning from one another, building a bridge across the void. Valeth had not spoken, yet the moment was full of understanding, anticipation, and unspoken possibilities. The human had noticed her. She had noticed him. And in that recognition, the first thread of connection was woven, fragile yet enduring, like the light of a distant star stretching across the endless darkness of space. Time had not stopped this time, but Valeth felt the same stillness she had felt when Eli had first spoken about her eyes. She realized that moments like this, brief and fragile, could carry significance far greater than centuries of silence. She understood, in a way she had never understood before, that connection was not a threat, nor a weakness, but a strength, one that humans wielded naturally, and one she could learn to embrace. And so, quietly, subtly, she began to move closer, not just in space, but in mind and intent, toward the human who had first seen her, and toward the possibility of a world that could be shared, not observed, not measured, but experienced together. The space station had settled into its usual rhythm, the quiet hum of machinery and the occasional chatter of humans filling the corridors. But Valeth could feel an unusual tension in the air, subtle yet undeniable. Something was shifting. She had learned to sense these things, not through words or sound, but through the vibrations and patterns of energy within the station, the movement of beings, the cadence of tasks. And today, the pattern was off. Eli had been assigned to repair a communications array on the external section of the station, a task considered routine but not without risk. The array extended into space, its panels fragile, its circuits exposed to the harshness of the void. Normally, Valeth would not accompany a human outside the station. Her kind considered human vulnerability a distraction, a liability. But something compelled her to move toward the preparation area, to watch, to be near, even if unseen. Eli suited up, his movements careful, deliberate, as he checked oxygen levels and tether lines. Valeth observed from the shadows, noting every adjustment, every hesitation. Humans were unpredictable, yet resilient, and she had seen their ability to adapt in ways her species did not. Still, risk remained. Something in her mind pressed against the rules of her kind. To intervene would be dangerous, but to remain passive could be worse. The airlock cycled open, the hiss of decompression filling the small room. Eli stepped out, tethered to the station, and began the slow, careful journey to the array. Valith followed silently, remaining inside the airlock, monitoring his progress through sensors and displays. She had never felt the pull of another being so strongly before. She could sense his concentration, his caution, his careful movements, and beneath that, a thread of vulnerability that tugged at her instincts. A sudden alarm sounded. A micrometeorite had struck the external panels, sending a shower of debris across the structure. Eli froze, adjusting his position to avoid the worst of it. Valith's senses screamed in warning. The patterns of energy, the shift in momentum, the trajectory of the debris, she could see it all in an instant. For a moment, time seemed to stretch, every fragment of rock and metal moving in slow motion. Eli, she wanted to shout to warn him to move him from danger, but the sound would not leave her throat. Her species had trained for silence, for controlled thought, for restraint in the face of chaos. Yet instinct burned within her, a need to act to prevent harm. She could not remain still. Eli dodged the first fragments, his hands working rapidly to secure the panels, but a larger piece of debris struck the outer edge of the array, sending him spinning dangerously. The tether held, but only barely, and a jolt of fear raced through him. Valith's mind reacted before her body could, sending a surge of telepathic force, a push of energy toward him, guiding his movements, steadying him against the violent momentum. The station seemed to bend in that instant, the universe narrowing to the connection between them. Eli did not understand fully what had saved him, but instinctively he adjusted, gripping the array, steadying himself, and completing the repair with a precision that belied the chaos around him. When he finally returned to the airlock, heart racing and hands trembling, he glanced at the sensors. He had no idea who or what had helped him. Valith remained inside the airlock, her mind still thrumming with the energy of the event. She had broken her silence in the only way she could, a telepathic intervention, subtle yet powerful. For a moment she allowed herself a thought she had forbidden for centuries, relief. Eli was safe, and it was because of her. The aftermath left both of them unsettled. Eli could not explain the sudden guidance he had felt, the inexplicable precision that allowed him to complete his task unscathed. Valith, for her part, understood the enormity of what she had done. Her people would not approve. To interfere with humans, to risk revealing her abilities, to allow her emotions to guide her actions, these were all violations of centuries of training. Yet she had acted, and she could not deny the sense of fulfillment that came with it. In the following days, Eli seemed more aware of her presence. He did not speak of the event, and he did not question the inexplicable, but his attention lingered in ways that were noticeable. He left his notes open near her usual spots, sketches of external panels, diagrams of the station's structure, as if inviting her to observe and understand his work. Valith studied them with careful attention, noting both the technical precision and the human element, small errors, adjustments, improvisations. Humans were imperfect, yet brilliant in ways her kind could not replicate. Her curiosity grew, not just about Eli, but about humans in general. She had always understood them as a species, as data points, as beings to study from a distance. But now, with the surge of connection she had felt, she began to perceive them differently. They were resilient, adaptable, and fearless in the face of risk, yet deeply emotional, capable of both great compassion and error. Eli embodied this paradox, and it fascinated her. The elders of her species grew impatient. Subtle telepathic messages arrived, warnings layered in both caution and authority. Valith had overstepped. Her actions with the human had been noted, her interference a breach of protocol. She felt the weight of their judgment, the cold precision of centuries of expectation pressing against her mind. Yet she could not regret what she had done. The human had lived because of her intervention. That simple fact carried more significance than obedience or protocol. One evening, during a quiet moment in the observation deck, Valith and Eli found themselves alone. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the viewport, distant and eternal, and for a while neither spoke. Eli watched her, studying the subtle shifts in her posture, the slight narrowing of her silver eyes, the way her body seemed to respond to the energy of the station itself. "You're different," he said softly, almost to himself. "I don't know how, but you notice things I don't even see." She had indeed noticed everything, every detail of his movements, every subtle pattern, every flicker of intention. She had acted when necessary, guided him through danger, and now she was aware of the bond forming between them, a bond that her species would see as dangerous, yet one she could not ignore. Eli took a deep breath, placing a hand on the panel beside him. "I feel like you understand more than anyone else, more than I do sometimes." His voice was quiet, but it carried warmth, trust, and recognition. Valeth felt the words resonate within her, a vibration of human emotion she was beginning to comprehend. That night, Valeth reflected on the events, the choices she had made, and the emerging connection with the human. She understood, in a way she had never understood before, that interaction, emotion, and recognition could be a source of strength. Her people had taught her detachment, precision, and observation. But she had discovered another path, one that embraced understanding, empathy, and the courage to act despite fear. The days following Eli's near accident were tense. Valeth remained vigilant, watching, studying, and anticipating. Humans continued their work, often unaware of the hidden dynamics around them. Eli seemed calmer, more deliberate, yet there was a spark in his eyes when he glanced toward her, a subtle acknowledgement that he sensed something unspoken between them. Valeth began to experiment with small, controlled communication. She moved closer during tasks, adjusted the positioning of tools and devices to make his work easier, and allowed herself brief, fleeting telepathic nudges, just enough to guide him without revealing the full extent of her abilities. Each gesture was a careful balance, a test of both trust and restraint. Humans and aliens alike began to notice the change. Some whispered, curious and puzzled. Others observed with fascination. Valeth did not respond to speculation. She continued her quiet work, focused entirely on understanding the human who had first seen her, who had noticed her eyes, who had inadvertently stopped time for her once before. Eli, meanwhile, felt the growing connection, even without understanding it fully. He found himself thinking of her during tasks, wondering what she was observing, what she understood, what she felt. He began to leave messages in subtle ways, sketches and notes that carried both technical information and personal reflection. Valeth read them carefully, her silver eyes tracing the lines and shapes, her mind absorbing not just the meaning but the intention behind each one. One night, during a quiet moment when the station's lights dimmed for energy conservation, Valeth found herself standing near Eli, watching the stars. She felt the pull of human curiosity, the warmth of recognition, and the strange exhilaration of connection. She understood that words were not yet necessary, but she could feel the stirring of speech within her, a desire to communicate beyond observation, to reach out in a form her species considered risky but profoundly human. She did not speak, not yet. But the impulse was there, a spark of possibility that had never existed before. She considered the consequences, the warnings, the potential breaches of protocol, and weighed them against the undeniable truth. Eli had seen her, and she had seen him. A bridge had begun to form, fragile but real, across the gulf of silence and space between their species. And in that quiet, suspended moment, Valeth realized that the future had shifted. The rules of her kind were no longer the only guiding force. Human connection, trust, and recognition were powerful tools, and she had only just begun to understand their depth. The station's corridors felt different to Valeth now. Every corner she turned, every panel she passed, every human she observed seemed to carry meaning she had not noticed before. The days following Eli's near accident had changed something inside her. She no longer viewed humans as distant, chaotic observers of the universe. They were unpredictable, yes, but they were alive in ways that fascinated her. And Eli, the human who had seen her eyes, the human she had helped without hesitation, was at the center of that fascination. She had begun experimenting quietly, practicing small sounds in the privacy of empty rooms. Her throat was not accustomed to forming words. The vibrations felt strange, almost alien even to her. Yet she persisted. Simple sounds, soft syllables, whispers that barely reached the level of audible speech. Each attempt left her feeling exhilarated and anxious at the same time. If her people discovered she was experimenting with vocal communication, they would not approve. But curiosity and connection were stronger than obedience in this moment. Eli noticed subtle changes in her behavior. He saw the way she lingered near the observation deck longer than usual, the way her eyes seemed to follow his every movement with deeper focus, and the faint, almost imperceptible sounds she made when she thought no one could hear. He did not comment immediately, choosing instead to leave small tokens of attention. A note with a simple greeting, a sketch of a distant star, a small, polished piece of metal from the station's outer hull. Each gesture was a quiet invitation for her to engage, to share something of herself in return. Valeth studied the tokens carefully. The note she touched lightly, her fingers brushing the paper, felt the intention behind the inked words. The sketch captured a view she had admired only once before, seen through Eli's eyes. The polished metal seemed ordinary, yet she understood that it carried meaning, a small gift, an offer of trust. These were human ways of communication, simple yet profound, and she wanted to respond. Her first attempt came unexpectedly. Eli was at a workstation, adjusting sensors along a side panel when Valeth approached. She had intended only to observe, to watch and study, but the impulse to speak was too strong. She opened her mouth, forming a sound that was not quite a word but not silence either, a tentative, broken syllable that startled them both. Eli froze, his hands hovering over the console. He turned slowly, eyes widening as he realized the sound had come from her. "Valeth," he asked softly, voice full of curiosity and awe, Did you just?" And in speaking, she had taken a step that could not be undone. Over the next few days, she practiced more, forming syllables, testing inflection, experimenting with tone. Eli became her guide without forcing her. He offered encouragement, explaining sounds, teaching her the simplest of words, sharing human expressions and idioms. "It's not about being perfect," he said one evening, his eyes soft in the glow of the observation deck. "It's about expressing what you feel, not just what you know." Each word she formed was a bridge to Eli, a step closer to the understanding she had never allowed herself before. Yet the pressure of her people remained. The elders had begun sending stronger telepathic messages, subtle at first, then more insistent. Valeth's attachment to a human, her experimentation with speech, and her growing curiosity were all violations of long-held rules. She felt the weight of their expectations pressing against her mind, reminding her of the centuries of training, of precision, of restraint. She did not respond to their messages immediately. Instead, she focused on Eli, on the bond that had begun to form, on the understanding that communication was not merely functional but transformative. Humans connected through emotion, recognition, and shared experience, and she was beginning to grasp that connection in a way her people could not. The tension reached a peak when a senior elder arrived at the station unexpectedly. The alien representative moved with authority, their presence commanding attention. They observed Valeth closely, their gaze piercing, assessing, evaluating. Eli noticed the subtle shift in energy, the way the elder's presence created a ripple through the station. He glanced at Valeth, concern flickering in his eyes. The elder approached Valeth directly, their voice a soft hum more felt than heard. "You have overstepped," they communicated. "Attachment to humans is forbidden. Communication beyond observation is forbidden. You risk yourself and your people." To resist meant challenging centuries of expectation, risking isolation and possibly punishment. "I am aware of the rules," she replied finally, her voice soft but deliberate, carrying weight she had never used before. "But observation is not enough. Understanding requires more. Connection is not weakness, it is strength." Her words were small, experimental, yet they carried conviction. Eli watched, heart pounding, aware that he was witnessing a turning point, a declaration that could reshape the relationship between species, a moment of courage that transcended rules. Over the following days, Valeth and Eli spent more time together, exploring both the station and the limits of communication. She began to speak in small sentences, tentative but clear, describing observations, feelings, and curiosity. Eli encouraged her gently, never pushing, always patient. The bond deepened, built on trust, recognition, and shared experience. Humans and aliens on the station began to notice. Whispers spread, speculation rose, curiosity blossomed. Valeth remained focused, undistracted by gossip, driven by the desire to understand and to be understood. Each word she spoke, each gesture she made, strengthened the bridge between her and Eli and by extension between human and alien. One evening, as they observed a distant star cluster, Eli spoke quietly, pointing to the shifting patterns of light. "You see that?" he asked. "The stars move differently depending on perspective, but if you watch long enough, you understand their rhythm." Eli's smile was gentle, filled with awe and respect. "Exactly," he said softly. "Understanding isn't just about seeing, it's about feeling, experiencing, and connecting." She realized that strength was not only in obedience or precision, but in courage, in empathy, and in the willingness to act beyond fear. The elder returned once more, observing Valeth and Eli together. This time there was hesitation in their assessment, a subtle recognition that perhaps what Valeth had discovered was not a violation but an evolution. Humans and aliens, once separated by silence and misunderstanding, could indeed connect. Valeth had become a bridge, a living example that communication, recognition, and shared experience could transcend tradition. Valeth continued her experiments, speaking in longer sentences, describing her thoughts, sharing insights, and even attempting humor, a concept her species found peculiar but intriguing. Eli laughed, corrected her gently, and encouraged her to try again. Each attempt strengthened her confidence, each interaction deepened their bond, and each moment of shared understanding expanded the possibilities of what communication could mean. The station itself seemed to respond to the change. Humans and aliens interacted more openly, curiosity replaced suspicion, and subtle cooperation increased. Valeth's courage, her willingness to bridge the gap, had a ripple effect, demonstrating that connection could be both safe and transformative. By the end of the week, Valeth had spoken full sentences, describing her observations of the station, the patterns of human behavior, and the stars beyond. She had learned idioms, attempted metaphors, and expressed curiosity in ways that had once been unimaginable for her species. Eli marveled at her progress, his admiration tempered by respect for her discipline and intelligence. Yet the greatest shift was internal. Valeth had begun to understand the power of recognition, the impact of empathy, and the necessity of courage. She had spoken, acted, and connected in ways that would forever alter her perspective. For the first time, she felt fully engaged in a world beyond observation, fully participating in life with a human who had seen her in a way that time itself seemed to stop for. And in that quiet, luminous space, Valeth realized that the bond she was forming was more than personal. It was symbolic. It was proof that understanding could transcend species, that courage could overcome tradition, and that connection, fragile yet enduring, could be the strongest force in the universe. The space station shuddered suddenly, a low vibration rolling through the metal corridors. Lights flickered, panels beeped urgently, and the hum of machinery became erratic. Eli, already at a control console, stiffened. He had seen minor malfunctions before, but this was different. The readings were abnormal, wild, unpredictable. Valeth, standing nearby, felt the shift immediately. Her silver eyes glowed faintly as she processed the data, sensing patterns and energy flows that humans could barely comprehend. Something enormous was approaching, an anomaly in space, a storm unlike anything she had witnessed. It pulsed with chaotic energy, moving toward the station with relentless force. Eli glanced at her, fear and urgency in his eyes. "Valeth, we need to stabilize the shields now, if this thing hits." He did not finish the sentence. The threat was clear. Failure could destroy the station, possibly kill everyone on board. Valeth's mind raced. She had learned to act with humans in mind, to guide, to protect, to communicate through subtle movements and telepathy. But now, speech was necessary. Words alone could bridge understanding, coordinate effort, and save lives. She inhaled, feeling the vibrations of the station beneath her feet, the pulse of energy from the approaching storm, and the presence of humans and aliens who relied on her insight. "Eli," she said, voice steady, clear, carrying authority, "we must reroute power through the auxiliary conduits. It will take precise timing, and I will guide you." Her voice, her clear, deliberate words, cut through the alarm and the chaos, giving structure to the frantic environment. "Understood," he said, trusting her instinct as he moved to follow her instructions. Valeth directed him, her hands moving over controls, her mind projecting clarity and focus. She coordinated with other aliens, guiding their actions with gestures and speech, blending human and alien understanding into a seamless operation. Her silver eyes flickered from console to console, monitoring every panel, every energy flow, every movement. She was a bridge between worlds, a conductor orchestrating survival against the storm that threatened to consume them all. The anomaly approached faster, its chaotic energy pushing the station's shields to the limit. Panels glowed red, alarms screamed, and humans and aliens worked in frantic synchronization. Valeth's voice was calm, precise, guiding, directing. She spoke not just to Eli, but to everyone in the control room, giving instructions in a mixture of human language and her own structured intonation, teaching others to understand the rhythm of her speech. Eli followed her directions, adjusting the conduits, rerouting power, stabilizing the systems. He marveled at her composure, at the clarity with which she commanded both humans and aliens alike. She was not just an observer or participant. She had become a leader, a force of reason and connection in the heart of chaos. The anomaly slammed against the station's shields with a violent pulse. Metal groaned, sparks flew, and for a moment it seemed impossible that they could survive. Valith's eyes glowed brighter, her voice rising above the alarms, guiding every action. Now shift the secondary grid to phase 2. Timing must be exact. Everyone follow my lead. A tense silence followed the storm's impact, broken only by the soft hum of machinery returning to normal. Humans and aliens alike exhaled, relief washing over the control room. Eli turned to Valith, eyes wide with awe. You saved us, all of us. We saved ourselves, she said softly, emphasizing the collaboration, the unity that had made survival possible. Her voice carried warmth, acknowledgement, and pride, not just in herself, but in every being who had worked alongside her. The elder of her species arrived moments later, observing the aftermath. The chaos of the storm had tested not only the station's systems, but the limits of tradition and expectation. They looked at Valith, who stood poised yet calm, her silver eyes reflecting both relief and satisfaction. For a long moment, the elder said nothing. Then slowly, a hum of acknowledgement passed between them, a subtle recognition that what Valith had done, bridging species, combining intellect and emotion, guiding humans and aliens alike, was remarkable, unprecedented, and perhaps necessary. Eli approached her, placing a hand gently on the edge of her arm. You spoke, you guided, you led. I can't imagine what would have happened if you hadn't. But your trust, it made it possible. But connection, real connection, was something entirely different. And now she understood it not as a threat, but as a strength. Over the following days, the station recovered from the storm. Repairs were made, systems recalibrated, and life returned to its usual rhythm. But the atmosphere had shifted. Humans and aliens interacted differently, inspired by the example Valith had set. Trust and collaboration flourished where suspicion and isolation had once dominated. Valith and Eli spent more time together, not just in work, but in quiet observation of the stars. They shared insights, stories, and discoveries. She experimented further with speech, forming complete sentences, describing thoughts, feelings, and ideas. Eli continued to guide her, patient and supportive, teaching humor, metaphor, and nuance. Her voice had become a bridge between worlds, not just a tool for communication, but a symbol of unity. The elder observed these interactions closely, sometimes approaching to test her restraint, sometimes to witness the evolving bond. Valith met every assessment with composure, confidence, and integrity. Her actions demonstrated that connection, courage, and understanding could coexist with discipline and tradition. Slowly, the elder's warning softened, replaced by acknowledgement and, in some subtle way, respect. One evening, Valith and Eli stood together at the observation deck, watching the stars pulse against the darkness of space. The station hummed quietly around them, humans and aliens working in harmony, systems running smoothly. Valith spoke, her voice clear and deliberate yet gentle. I see now, she said, why you humans risk, why you strive, why you speak not for rules but for understanding. It's not perfect, it's not precise, but it's real, and it matters. Not as a human claiming dominance, not as a teacher over a student, but as a partner, a fellow observer, and a friend. The gesture carried meaning, trust, and affirmation. Valith felt it fully, the connection solidified not by rules or obligation, but by choice and recognition. The station's corridors buzzed softly with life. But in this small moment, above the hum of machinery and the glow of distant stars, human and alien shared an understanding that transcended language, species, and tradition. They had faced danger, uncertainty, and expectation, and together they had prevailed. Valith spoke again, voice carrying across the observation deck, calm, confident, and full of meaning. You saw me, you trusted me, and now we see together, all of us. Connection, understanding, and courage had forged something lasting, a testament to the strength of unity, the power of recognition, and the courage to act beyond fear. Eli smiled, eyes bright with emotion. And together we can face anything. In that moment, she understood fully the meaning of what she had learned, that speech, action, trust, and courage were not just tools, they were a bridge. And with that bridge, human and alien, observer and participant could face any future together. And as the stars pulsed beyond the station, Valith felt a profound certainty. Her silence had ended, her voice had begun, and a new era of understanding had dawned. Not for humans alone, not for aliens alone, but for both, united by recognition, courage, and hope.